What is up, everybody? I know you haven't heard that sea shanty in a while, and you're probably thinking, if you've been riding and dying with the Schooner Pod, you're like, what the heck is he bringing out the Captain's Dice theme song back? And sadly, today, we're not going to be rolling any dice. We're going to be talking something closer to me, something near and dear to me, which is just kind of the state of TCU athletics. As we know, this past weekend, TCU went into Norman, scored 31 points, but still got absolutely obliterated by the Sooners, which is understandable because OU typically is a good team. But considering where OU was at coming into that game with starting a new quarterback for his first game, and kind of where we're at with our program development, where we have Max Duggan in his third year, Zach Evans, who's one of the most electric players in college football right now, and Quentin Johnston, who we saw the other night, was just tearing it up. Seeing our performance that night is just not acceptable, and it's not acceptable where this program was on when it started in the Mountain West, finally got to that Rose Bowl, and then ultimately got to the Big 12, and our views and hopes of what that Big 12 move would be. Our first 3 years were great, but ever since then, it's just laid flat. I thought this year was going to be different just because we finally had the pieces, but sadly it's not. And so I wanted to come on here today and just give my my State of the Union or State of the Frogs address, where I just talk about some of the issues that are going on in TC's program right now and just maybe offer up some solutions of some sorts of how we can move forward for as Frog fans. Because the one thing I have seen that yesterday, a guy by the name, I'm not familiar with him, hadn't heard of him until yesterday, but Matt Jennings released an article, and a lot of people in the message boards were either one way or the other. It seemed like they had some personal issues with the author, or maybe some of the issues that he brought up. But for many, some of the points that Matt Jennings raised were entirely accurate in what we've been feeling as fans for the last few years. So I kind of wanted to take a more middle ground stance to that article, considering that article brought in a whole bunch of outside issues. Some of the stuff I think that Gary Patterson couldn't control that happened during his tenure, that I think happens at college football programs everywhere, and something that you can't fault him for. But the one thing you can fault Gary Patterson and the administration at TCU is kind of the performance that is happening on the field. And so I kind of want to stick to that. I want to stick to the big picture and the on the field stuff. And so I first just want to talk about where we are now before we go big picture, where we are now, and kind of some of the issues that I've seen this year and what's concerning to me. So over the past 2-3 years, our main issue was offense. Gary Patterson's defense was still doing fine, like it always did, even if it wasn't as good as maybe like the Rose Bowl years, or even our brief to near college football playoff appearance and Peach Bowl and kind of the Trayvon Boykin years. Gary Patterson's defense has always been good, and it's been kind of an offensive issue. We haven't been able to figure out what we're going to do on the play calling side of the ball. And this year, it's just completely flipped. And I think it's flipped for several reasons. The main one being the fact that we finally have this offensive talent that we have has developed. And regardless of which play caller you put behind there, those guys are going to come out and perform. Like Max Duggan is still a above average quarterback. Zach Evans is a superstar. Like those guys are going to perform regardless of the play calling and the situations you put them in, just because they're naturally such good athletes. But this year we started to see that Gary Patterson, his 4-2-5 defense, is starting to degrade. And this has started to highlight some of my issues that I have with Gary Patterson, is that the 4-2-5, although it's worked in years past, I don't understand why he won't go away from that. I know he was the one who kind of engineered that offense, and many people use it today, but that defense relies on, you have 4 guys up front putting pressure on the quarterback or getting stops in the backfield with running backs. That hasn't happened. Linebackers that are chasing the ball, like we've had with Tank Carter, Ty Summers, some of those guys in the past. We don't have them. And then you have to do coverage schemes with the five cornerbacks and safeties in the back in order to kind of disguise some pressure against them and ultimately just bend, not break. And what's bad is this year you could tell especially the secondary, they don't know how to run this 4-2-5. It's I don't know if it's a intellectual thing that they're having troubles with it. I don't believe it's physical talents because we have some of our most physically talented classes that we've ever had. But the blown coverages on Saturday were just absolutely ridiculous. It was either blown coverage or pass interference because they had gotten beat so bad. And so I know we've seen it all this year that the players can't play this. And I think a lot of people on the message boards are saying it's their fault. And to an extent, it is. Like, if they don't have those skills, if they can't learn the system, it is on them. But also at the same time, Gary Patterson's the leader of our team. And not only that, he's the leader of the defense, he's the defensive play caller. And the fact that he can't come up with another scheme to help us out, just to give some sort of, we don't even need to be a true Gary Patterson defense. We just don't need to allow the deep ball so much. And Gary Patterson can't even change his mind or change his viewpoint on how he constructs his defense. And all he does is just blame his players. That's all he's doing right now. We saw it in the post game conferences where he's blaming a lot of his strategical decisions on the players when it came to special teams, fourth down calling. Gary, you are the leader of the team. You are the leader of the defense. And I know you're a defensive mastermind. You have to come up with something different. Though you can go back to the 4-2-5 next year once you find the guys that can come into that system. But it's going to do nothing for our team if you just sit there and blame these guys for not running it when you're giving them a game plan that's just at the start of the game going to fail. And we saw that against OU. And I don't think OU this year has world beater wide receivers. They're good. They're very good, but it's ridiculous that he can't come up with the defensive scheme to either put pressure on the quarterback, which we didn't see at all. Caleb Williams had all the time in the world. He played perfectly, and I expect him to win a Heisman, but there was no pressure. There was nothing come Saturday. There was no pressure on the receivers to make catches. It was just ridiculous. OU got everything that they wanted. And I think it goes back to just kind of those simple play calling things. So I think Gary, to save the season, you got to change something about the defense because the 4-2-5 is just not working. Our guys aren't equipped for it. And at this point, you can blame them the first time or two, but we've seen every single game this season, we're getting beat over the top. Change the system. And I think this isn't the only issue. I think this is kind of the short-term issue, the one that we're seeing this season, because obviously offensive side of the ball, we're doing great. But if we're going to be honest with ourselves, could our offense be better? Absolutely. And that's what I've had kind of where this all stemmed from over the past few years was how inconsistent we are on offense and why that scares me for TCU's future. So for those not familiar with the team, right now, how we have it is Doug Meacham, who was one of the co-offensive coordinators during the Boykin years. He's become the play caller. And then we have Jerry Kill, who is the former Minnesota coach, had some issues, health issues with epilepsy and stuff like that. So he's not able to do full-time coaching. But Gary has basically handcuffed him as a offensive analyst to Doug Meacham. So kind of what we've had the past 6 years, Gary continues to go back to this. We have too many cooks in the kitchen. We have two guys trying to run an offense where everybody else around the nation is running one offensive coordinator. It's a system that works, and there's a reason why people don't use these brain trusts in order to run an offense. We're kind of seeing it that even this year, we lack offensive identity. And this year is probably one of the better years. In the past, we just lack offensive identity. With Jerry Kill and Meacham right now, Doug Meacham, he's an air raid guy. He wants to run the full air raid, and you could see that. We're running 5 wide, Zach Evans splitting out with Doug in the backfield, shooting shotgun. But you could tell Jerry Kill, you could tell his play calls because there are all these power runs with Duggan, which have gotten maybe an average of a yard. We do on fourth down, we won't get down under center. We just try to run stuff out of the backfield. And so we don't have a good identity at all with what our personnel is. If we want to be a kill style physical offense, then make him offensive coordinator. If we want to be an air raid style offense, make Meacham coordinator. But don't put these two people together and try to make it work. If they're ever an impasse, that never works. It worked only in the Boykin years just because we had the most insane talent we've ever seen on a TCU team. I'm tired of relying on talent in order to get us wins when we could have a good coaching system that automatically gets us 7-8 wins and then with our talent and recruiting that we're doing, can get us into those 10, 11 win seasons. But right now, the system is just not working. And I read this on the message boards, and I thought this was true, is our hiring when it comes to the offensive side of the ball, we're just hiring guys that are good at the job. We're not hiring the best people for the job. And that's what I kind of put on the AD and Gary. Like, he's hiring his friends. He's hiring this offensive playroom just to fail by making it basically a brain trust. Instead of going out there and getting a young play caller, going out there and getting an established play caller that really gives our team an identity so we know which players to recruit. This year we've been a power running team. Last year we've been a spread offense. We have no offensive identity. And that scares me because Duggan, I think, is a really good quarterback. But what happens once he graduates? If we still have this weird offensive play calling and development, which I think is pretty suspect under Kenny Hill when it comes to quarterbacks, are we ever going to get a good quarterback again? Or are we just going to have to solely rely on those quarterbacks' raw talent? Which I think is a recipe to fail, as we've kind of seen with Duggan. Duggan's been really good, but it just seems like nobody has helped him develop, and I think that's part of the fact that we have a guy my age in the QB room at QB coach with Kenny Hill. I just think we're hiring guys that are good, but we're not hiring the best. Now let's bring it up even more. Talked a little bit about Gary's play calling, kind of just some of the coaching hires, how we can't seem to get some consistency on offense. Now let's go to the bigger picture, and this kind of gets more into TCU athletics as a whole, but this is where I think a lot of our problems stem from, because I think for years, a lot of people that follow TCU athletics want change in multiple sports, but it starts with the man up top, Jeremiah Donati. He came in after Crystal Conte left for Texas and was spoken about at the time of being kind of like his protege, that he would bring a similar style of leadership as CDC did to TCU. And CDC is one of my favorite people to ever have been in Fort Worth. And the reason why is CDC was always willing to take risk. Whenever we left the Mountain West, we initially got an invite to the Big East, which was honestly an awesome step up at the time, but CDC just didn't want to stop there. He convinced Texas to let us join the Big 12 and ultimately put us in a position that we could be a Power 5 program and have the resources to have continued success each year. And the next move that I really admired, and although it didn't age well, but I admired just kind of that boldness and that riskiness, is whenever we saw that we built our brand new basketball facility, we needed somebody there that would be a splash. We went out and got Jamie Dixon. And I could talk about that a little bit and how Dixon has ultimately just kind of been bleh at TCU. But I appreciate CDC for that move, that he's willing to go buy a guy out of his contract, a proven winner at Pitt at the time, and bring him here to get fans excited. He was willing to take risk. He wasn't just sitting around, and he was able to get money into the athletic program in order to make these moves. Donati hasn't done anything, and I call him a limp fish. Like, I joke with my friends that he's the limp fish AD, but it's true. In one sport, we have Gary Patterson, and although I think Gary at some point needs to go because none of the issues are being solved and nobody's putting pressure on him, and we need to think about our future, especially with SMU and Baylor rising around us, but he hasn't put any pressure on Gary Patterson to change. Donati hasn't. He's just kind of let Gary do whatever he wants. And that's how we got into the situation of having the brain trust for an offensive coordinator, having no decision-making there. And then also just like defense, like not putting, like, you need to have, even though you're not the football coach, you got to go into Gary's office and start talking to him about him, because 3 losses this early in the season, especially against two teams in Texas and OU that we should be competing with, and then SMU, who we should be blowing out. And so he's just kind of laissez-faire attitude. I don't know if he's scared of Gary Patterson or why he won't put pressure on him, but that's what I've seen over the past few years is we needed change on the offensive side of the ball, and he's just kind of let it happen. And I don't know if it's because he's not able to fundraise in order to buy out contracts, but he needs to be searching for those guys to set us up for the future. We need a more consistent offensive coordinator. We need a contingency plan in case we see that Gary Patterson is not the coach for the future. We can't get left in the dust again. We barely made this Big 12 move. We're thankful for it. This go-around once OU and Texas left, but we've seen realignment happen again, and we were almost left in the dust this time. And you've got to start thinking about those. And I think he just does not have a strategic plan for that. And then we see kind of his more limp fish attitude again when it comes to Jamie Dixon. And I know CDC is the one that hired him. And it's a tough situation to deal with because honestly, Jamie Dixon is owed a lot of money. But look, you've got to get the fans excited. He complains all the time of people not coming to basketball games. Well, you've got to field a competitive team in order for people to come to basketball games. I'm sorry. When you're not from a basketball school, you need some consistent success. And I'm not talking about being the best in the Big 12, but hey, a tournament run every other year, we need that. We need that to get people excited. And all he's allowed Jamie Dixon to do is, one, when Jamie Dixon had the offer on the table to UCLA, if he wants to go do that, let him go. There's no point keeping an employee that wants to leave and just have him mail it in. Because now we have a situation where we're paying him more than Scott Drew, we're getting worse results, and he's just barely, he's mailing it in. And we got to fire him at some point. We're going to have to pay up. You should have let UCLA buy him out then. It's not good. We weren't good then. I don't understand that move. I really don't. And so now we're stuck with the situation where we have 8 guys last year transfer out of the program, and we have 8 guys transfer in. That's not a way to build. I know the transfer portal is a necessary part of today's modern athletics, but it's not meant to build a mercenary team year after year after year because you can't keep the talent that you recruited. But he won't do anything about those two. And then let's go to our third sport, probably the most consistent TCU sport, one of the ones I love the most. Not many people watch it, but it's TCU baseball. And TCU baseball hit an impasse this past summer when Schlossnagle, we found out there's a possibility of him leaving. We offered him one of the biggest contracts that you can for a baseball coach, making him, I think, top 2 or top 3 earners in the nation, and he denied it. And I'm not going to put that on Donati. Like, that's not his fault. There was, I think, some things going on in Coach Schloss's personal life and stuff like that he just wanted to move on, and that's fine. So I don't fault him for that. But what I do is him going out immediately and start hiring a search firm. Whenever we have a guy in Kirk Sarlos in our own dugout that all the players want, that all the recruits want, that all the former players loved, the reason why TCU's pitching identity is the way it is because of Sarlos. He's young. He knows how to recruit for TCU, and yet you're doing this grandiose search. You're spending those resources that I guess we don't have for the other sports to get rid of our guys, but we're hiring a consulting firm to find a guy who's right there. So it just feels like he's just fine with the way TCU athletics are, just being kind of mediocre and pretty good at baseball. And I just don't like that. I like CDC's approach, where when you're a small school like us, and I think, sadly, I'm going to have to compliment them, and they're one of our rivals, but compliment Baylor. Baylor has been aggressive when it came to their hires. They went out. They got a young guy in Matt Rule from Temple. He was proven he had taken a team that has really no football tradition, took a consistent bowl success. Hired him. Great guy, led the program. Unfortunate that he wanted to go to the NFL. And the Baylor athletic department, whenever Matt Rule left, they had Joey McGuire there, who was the associate head coach. And a lot of the players wanted him, but he had no real coaching experience, nothing too special. I think it's just players liked him. And they made a bold move and went out and got Dave Aranda. And a guy not really connected in the Baylor family or anything like that, but got it, and look where they're at. They've developed their quarterbacks well. Gary Bohannon, the past times I saw him back in 2019, like I said on the Schooner Pod, he was a running back, basically. And now Gary Bohannon's going out there, looks like the most electric passer in the Big 12, if you don't count Caleb Williams. But Caleb Williams has only started one game against a bad TCU defense. But they took a guy and just developed him into this great quarterback, and they get good, consistent defensive play. They have an offensive identity. So Baylor's aggressiveness have put them where they are at today. That's why they've won a national championship in basketball. That's why they have been good at football, and they've been consistently good at football even when they've had two head coaching turnovers in the last 5 years. Like, that's incredible. Like, they've had better seasons than since us, and we've had the guy that we've had for 20 years with program consistency, and that's horrible. That's horrible. I don't know how our AD looks at that and doesn't feel sick to his stomach that our rivals are just running laps around us in a more tumultuous space and beating us like that. So, solutions. It's easy to identify problems, but it's easy to identify these problems, but how can we move forward? What do we need to do in the short term? What do we need to do in the long term in order to make TCU a consistently, we don't have to be what we were in 2014, 2015 every year. Those were miracle seasons for a program our size. But how can we get to 8-4, 9-3 wins every season consistently, and then have some of those 10-2, 11-1 seasons to ultimately get ourselves to the Big 12 championship? The first that's kind of more short term, just to kind of save the season, is Patterson has to do a better job of evaluating our talent and making defensive schemes to fit those guys. He is a smart man. He's very smart on the defensive side of the ball. So I don't know why he can't come up with another scheme besides a 4-2-5, which we obviously can't run this year. It doesn't make sense. He needs to change that. Second, our media surrounding TCU, and I know there's not, needs to start putting pressure on the athletic department. It's getting out of hand by the mediocrity that we're seeing and just letting the same stuff happen over and over again, especially in the football program. And I think some of our media members, they do a incredible job. Or I think the coverage of TCU football, especially, incredible. But the one thing they won't do is criticize Patterson, the AD, or any of those institutions because I think they're scared of whether we already get so little media access when it comes to Gary Patterson that they could get cut off. But this is getting ridiculous. Like, you're a beat writer. Like, you are a part of this team. You cover this team. You should want to see this team succeed. And if y'all keep on just putting the blame on the players or coming up other excuses of not what is happening in our leadership, because ultimately at the end of the day, it is the leader's job to fix the problems. They have the cards they've been dealt with. They need to figure out something to do with it and stop coming up with excuses. And I'm really sick and tired of it. I'm tired of going and reading TCU articles and then coming up with more excuses about Patterson, like the players aren't instituting his vision. Maybe the vision is too grand and you need to simplify it. That's Patterson's job. These players aren't getting paid $1 million a year to coach this team. Patterson is. So there needs to be some pressure from TCU media on TCU as an institution in order to see some change. I'm not saying change of fire Patterson right now. It could get to that point if nothing changes, but we need an offensive coordinator, a really good one. A really good one. With the talent that we have and seeing where our defense is at, we need a better offensive coordinator. We need to make some of those hires. Now, let's go to the long-term stuff. And I think this comes down to one thing with the long term. I don't think Donati's the guy. I thought he was coming in, just being around CDC, and I thought seeing some of the moves he had to take in order to make sure TCU was put on a national stage as a school of 9,000 to 10,000 kids. I thought he would continue that tradition and continue that pressure that you always. There's no sitting on your hands at TCU when it comes to the athletic department. It's not like an OU. It's not like a Texas. It's not like an Alabama. It's not like any of those big Power 5 schools where your accomplishments, you can just rest on those, and you're probably going to do pretty well. You're probably going to do pretty well at those schools. And he has kind of taken that approach, done no big moves. Whenever he had a chance for his big move for the baseball coach, he kind of fumbled it in order to get to the right one. And as I see it now, we have a lame duck coach in our basketball program who isn't helping us do anything for our future. We're just basically writing out his contract so we can maybe buy him out, even though you had the chance to get rid of him. And then you refuse to go up against Gary Patterson and either tell him to change something on his side of the ball or just clean up. We need to gut just the position coaches and a few other things in that program, and he's not willing to do that. He allowed Doug Meacham and Jerry Kill this whole situation to happen again. They had their out once Sonny Cumbie left. They could have said, once Sonny Cumbie left, we could have just instituted an actual OC, gotten somebody from outside, which might be good because Gary hires a lot of his friends. Get an outside voice, somebody that can challenge him. But no, he just allowed that. He just allowed that mediocrity to continue. And I think it all starts with him. Like, the buck stops at him ultimately, and just what I've seen over the past few years, he's been a horrible athletic director, and it's just crashed basically all the programs that I've come to love, like from even growing up seeing TCU go to the Rose Bowl and then going to school there. He has completely bobbled our situation that we are in. We were in the perfect situation. We were riding high coming in 2014, 2015, having 2 back-to-back appearances in the Big 12 title game. And we've just botched it since. And it's on him at the end of the day. And I think we need change there. We need to get somebody that's hungry, that realizes the position that TCU's in, that you can never stop because somebody, once you do something good, and we've seen it with Baylor, once you do something good, they poach you. They'll poach your talent away from them. And I think that's what Donati's scared of is, oh, if I hire somebody new and he's good and they poach him, what do I do? You just got to be aggressive. Baylor has figured out a way to be aggressive, even when their coaches are getting poached constantly. And heck, we might even see a third head coach come in if Dave Aranda, if they try to go after him for LSU. And he's going to make some noise, even not in the LSU position, just by the year Baylor's having this year. And I don't think Donati's there I don't think he's willing to take those moves. I don't think he's there to always stay hungry and to lead TCU to the best possible situation. So that being said, my ultimate long-term solution, we need to find a new AD. We need to find new AD. I don't think Gary's lost yet, but I will say this. If Gary doesn't change the defense this year in the next game and it doesn't improve, especially when we play the Iowa States, the OSUs, the Baylors still left on our schedule, these good teams, and we lose to them, he should go. He should go. He's seen it's failed, and I don't know why you would run it again if it's going to fail. But I trust in Gary that he can maybe rework the defense and just help it. We have an offense, a good enough offense this year to score points. We just needed to hold it some, which we just haven't gotten this entire season. So sadly, I had to bring back the Captain's Dice music and the sea shanties and stuff to kind of talk about something a little bit more serious today. And thank you for Bobby and the Schooner Pod for just giving me this opportunity today. I know this is a OU feed and y'all talk specifically about OU, but I think this was for any TCU listeners or any people out there that are just interested in TCU football. I think hopefully I gave a pretty level-headed kind of analysis of what's going on with our program, how we can solve it in the future, and really some of our underlying problems that we need to change. And so with that, hopefully we see some change because it's sad because I expected to lose to OU, but I expected to be competitive, especially when your offense is scoring that well. And just some of the boneheaded decisions that we saw in the coaching staff and basically not having a defense that looked completely unprepared, and I just don't know what they're doing in practice. Like, that makes me sad, seeing the potential of what this team could be. So hopefully we see some change, but we'll never know. We'll never know. So with that, thank y'all for listening and hope y'all have a good day.